Hello and welcome back to the channel, and thank you for joining me in another of my wonderful interviews. Now, as you know, I'm an avid reader, and I don't always get a chance to read everything I want, but people are very kind and they send me books. And every now and again, somebody's watching the channel and thinks, oh, I must send Richard a book because it relates to the sort of things that he talks about in the Truth Freedom movement or some of the history that we've gone through fairly recently. And one gentleman did just that. He sent me a book which is very much like 1984, I suppose, but it's a more updated thing, and it's called Morewellian. 2024. Look at that. Stephen Griffith is the author's name, and he's joining me here now to tell me about it. Hello, Stephen.
Hello, Richard. Great to be with you. Thanks for
Thank
the
you.
opportunity.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for coming on the show, and thank you for sending me your excellent book, Morewellian. I confess that I haven't had a chance to get right the way through it, but I am a good third in, and it is a gripping novel. It is a novel, although as you read it, you suddenly realise, hang on a minute, this is a bit like a history going on here. Perhaps something that we all ought to have a look at, because it reveals very much a synergy between what has happened in 2020, without saying too much that might disturb the YouTube platform, and your book, which is fascinating. So I want to talk about that, even though I don't know how it ends. But you have some interesting characters and some very, let's say, creative versions on names that people can, with a little simple mind leaping, work out who you might be, and I stress might be, referring to, which is, I love that sort of thing. So welcome to the show. Shall we just talk about writing in general, first of all? This isn't your first book by any means.
No, it's my second book. The first book was the Kowloon English Club, which I wrote. It was like a sort of memoir, a novel memoir of my time in Hong Kong, where I taught English for about 7 years. And so it's like a cultural exploration through that time, a very important time in Hong Kong's history. I was there before the handover and for subsequent years after. So
Right.
it's a little bit political, but mainly it's just a fairly entertaining read about a hapless English teacher as he makes his way in a sort of alien climate and culture.
Yes. I mean, you do like language, which is great. It's a great read. Is your background within English? Were you a teacher or anything like that?
Not before I went to Hong Kong. I just did a sort of TEFL course, and I was backpacking around Asia for some months. But I fancied the opportunity of working in Hong Kong before, while it was still British, and
Right.
the opportunity was there. And yeah, it was a tremendous experience. And yeah, and I used my interest in language and interest in sort of grammar and that kind of thing to educate the people of Hong Kong, I guess.
And how did they take to an English teacher? I imagine that because I understand the Chinese love the language, or it's an important language for them to learn. I mean, it's sort of a global language now, isn't it?
Oh yeah, it's I mean they all learn English to a certain level, so it wasn't some people say, well, how do you teach English
Hmm.
to people that don't speak, hardly speak
Because
the language? But most of them have a grounding in the grammar and the
right,
basic vocabulary.
because their language is it's a different type of thing in the voice, isn't it? It's a different way of expressing words with more sounds. I don't know quite the right words to explain it, but if you talk to someone a China or listen to Chinese talking, it's a I don't know, it just seems a completely different way of approaching a language
well, and
to
and
ours.
yeah, and Cantonese in particular is like it's a dialect really, and
Right.
there's about nine different tones. So each syllable, for example, a word like Gao, there'll be nine different ways of saying it. It'll be like Gao, 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 and each will have a different meaning. So
God.
if you try learning that as a foreign language, it's an absolute minefield.
Yeah.
You
I
can
mean,
just
it
say,
does make me feel that English was actually quite easy, but from other people, they say, no, English is terrible because of all the nouns and adjectives and, the variations on it. And of course, the spelling is, well, even for English
yeah, I
people,
mean,
it's a nightmare.
I think English is difficult to master, but it's not difficult to learn in its simplest form, because
Right.
you can use bad grammar in English and people will still understand you.
Yes.
And
Well, talk to 90% of the youngsters
yeah,
well,
yeah,
in England, and they're not necessarily using very particularly good grammar. So, yeah, I absolutely get your point. By the way, I'm not trying to be offensive to young people.
well,
Just
no,
make that
but
clear.
yeah, we see it all the time, don't we?
Yeah,
Unfortunately, the
and
education
part of
ain't what it used to be, Richard.
it certainly ain't a book that I wrote,
Yeah,
and that sort of thing. And it's interesting that we say that, because a lot of that becomes from the fact that many people now don't read at all.
yeah, yeah. Like my son, I keep trying to get him to read, and he's more interested in going on TikTok and
Yeah.
playing video games, and it's a real shame, because it fertilizes your mind, it gives you inspiration, gives you ideas, makes you learn things you'd never know otherwise. It, stimulates your imagination.
I don't know if you found this. I mean, because I love books and I've got quite a large. I mean, I didn't consider that I had a large collection, but as I've gone round various people's houses and friends, or interviewed people and what have you, one of the things I used to love doing is looking at their bookcases to see the sort
Mm.
of reading material they do.
Yeah, me
And
too.
I've noticed in the last 10, 20 years, barely anybody has any bookcases, and barely anybody has any real books. They might have, a cookbook or sort of coffee table books and that sort of thing, but it's very rare now, it seems to me, to see a large collection of books in the way that LPs are no longer on display. Because
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a shame that. Although there are some people that will put perfectly pristine books
yeah,
in the
they've
bookshelf,
never
like
touched.
almost like intellectual kind of snobbery or
Yes,
something, which they've never touched, but just to show
yes,
you that
they've never cracked it
they're
open.
well read and intellectual.
Yeah, and they're getting their information. Well, I mean, that's the thing. A lot of people get their information in very small chunks from the internet, Wikipedia and other nefarious places like that that may or may not be accurate. And that's not to say books are necessarily accurate, because they can go out of date. But if a printed book is on your shelf, it can't be changed. And one of the things I worry about is that history, as we know, is being manipulated, and if everything's in electrical digital format, it's very easy to change that. Harder to change a book,
Yeah, yeah,
a printed
and
book.
it's a shame that young people's attention spans tend to be so short nowadays, that they're just not able to commit the time and the intellectual energy into spending an hour sort of reading a book, when
Yes.
everything is just like instant hits online, and a little dopamine hit here and a little dopamine hit there, and they're kind of addicted.
Yeah.
It's a great shame. Somehow we need to get out of it and have a revival of literature and reading and writing as well. Um,
Now, I couldn't agree more. So the question begs then, um, what makes you want to write and write books when selling books is not an easy thing? Getting something published is very, very difficult. It's like so many things, an industry that's sewn up, and fewer people are reading all the time.
yeah, I mean, this might surprise you for somebody that's a writer, but I find I'm not that articulate with the spoken language. And I
Right.
find when I've got a blank screen or a blank piece of paper, I can formulate my ideas, I can express myself, and I can say exactly what I want in a much more clear and convincing manner. But when I'm maybe talking, sometimes I lose my thread, or I just
Yes.
yeah. So maybe I'm a bit of an introvert, but it kind of writing works for me better than I'm not a natural communicator like you are with the spoken language. But when
Well,
I'm
I
writing, I
would.
find I find I'm in my comfort zone. I'm sort of in my
Yes.
element, and I can express myself well. And I don't even get writer's block usually, like some people do. I'm just able to
just straight
get,
at
get
it.
everything down, and it may not even be that good the first time, but you let yourself flow, and then later you have the editing process, and you can pare down what's superfluous and um, bring it all together and cut and paste certain bits and
Yes.
make it work that way. And I find that process very very satisfying.
Yeah. No, no. I mean, I totally agree about trying to, on the spare of the moment, trying to coordinate your thoughts, especially if you're talking to somebody as we are now. I'll often go away and think, oh, I could have expressed that so much better if I had a little bit more time.
Oh, totally, totally.
And the process of writing is a slower process as well, isn't it?
Mm.
Because you're thinking and
Yeah, well,
you're writing.
I think my brain is a bit slower. That's why sort of writing sort of suits me because I can take my time and I can,
Yeah.
get my ideas out the way I want them without the sort of restrictions on, you know, having to get it out in a few seconds. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about your book then, Morewellian, and clearly the title comes from George Orwell, 1984,
Yeah.
and we can see that he was very much predicting an environment that we find ourselves more and more
Yeah.
heading
Totally. Yeah.
towards. With all the restrictions, and in fact, in 2020, when we had all the lockdowns and things, people thought that we were sort of there. But I feel we're getting even more closer as time has passed and more
Yeah.
restrictions and rights have been taken away, which are the sort of things I imagine that you're explaining further in the book. You're, as we mentioned at the beginning, you've got an interest in Hong Kong. This is a similar story, shall we say, certainly at the beginning, about the outbreak of a certain virus that originates in China, to do with wet markets, as we're told. And so there's familiar themes that we know, and we've had suspicions or facts have come out since about the origin of what happened in 2020. And of course, this goes into it in much more detail in a gripping novel. And what I like is that I've never been to Hong Kong or China or the Far East. I've only sort of been to America and Europe. And so you do give a fascinating insight to the mindset and also the busyness of the place,
Mm.
and your central character, who on the one hand seems to absolutely thrive on that sort of place, that certainly the busyness, and as a journalist, your main character is a journalist, but also he goes back and he sort of, there's that sort of, I quite like the piece of over here, but there's something driving him, which obviously is part of the book, and to uncover what goes on. So let's talk about what motivated you to write a book about similar circumstances to what we've gone through.
Um, I suppose, like, well, maybe not a lot of people, but a certain section of society, we were um, totally bamboozled what happened in 2020.
Right.
Maybe we were prepared to give them the benefit of the doubt in the first month or so, but then it became quite clear that the pandemic wasn't the deadly. Well, am I allowed to say this? That or the virus wasn't the
Wasn't well, no, it's, I mean, I think that's a
what wasn't
factual
the
thing, isn't it?
deadly? Yeah, what wasn't the deadly threat that we'd been sold,
Yes.
and that kind of was what I sort of suspected was going to happen, um, and it became quite clear to me as the propaganda was sort of increased and the fear mongering and everything. It just seemed quite clear to me that there seemed to be some sort of agenda behind it,
Yes.
and so I started asking questions, and I would talk to people, and then I'd be frustrated that they seemed to be buying the propaganda basically, and then I became frustrated with my inability to convince people, and then I was just looking for more answers. What's motivating the elites who are pushing us towards economic ruin, or on the back of like a fairly mild incident of flu.
Yes.
So then I suppose you could say my conspiratorial mind started working, and I was looking into theories that may lie behind it and what was motivating them. And so from that was the seeds of the story, really.
Yes. Yeah. No. Absolutely. And you start. It's interesting because you start well back, which it's a very difficult subject to talk about in some ways because of the censorship on the platform and people's, you know, WHO and what have you, who may not want certain things discussed, and so that becomes very difficult. But you start well back in history, where you'll sort of, I suppose, you're holding a mirror up to what we now know about, or what many people now suspect, at least, if not know, about the origins of what became this world pandemic, in which certain things had already been discovered and people had been shut up and kept quiet until on chapter 11, I think it is. It's called The Big One, which is the beginning, really, of the pandemic in your book that suddenly grips the world that people are thrust into, and yet your journalist had a slight insight into something that had happened.
Yeah,
I don't want to give too much away
yeah,
because
that's fine.
obviously we want people to read the book and we don't want to put any spoilers in.
Yeah, I suppose the early stages are setting the scene, and it's kind of setting the scene for his awakening, where
Right.
he's meeting certain people that are influencing him and giving him a potential insight of what's going on in China. And there's a precursor with something like the SARS disease, which happened, probably 20 years ago or something like
Yeah.
that. And so he's getting an idea that something could be brewing, in terms of a pandemic that's coming. And then when it comes from the same place as the original SARS. Well, in the novel anyway,
Mm.
there's a little bit of author's license on that one, but generally, I have tried to keep the science and the facts and the politics as accurate as I can, and just weaving a story into the narrative, really.
Yeah. So it's a
Um,
sort of like you'd see these what would you call it? Historical novels set in the, I don't know, in Tudor England or something. The facts are there,
yeah,
but there's a sort of story that could be true or isn't really
yeah,
true.
and I like the idea that he's a journalist, and then he meets this Chinese scientist who's the whistleblower. So he's learning a lot from her, and together they become quite a force. So she has the sort of more scientific knowledge. He has the ability to communicate and to find a large audience because he's quite a well established journalist at that time. But then he, like as has happened in reality, he gets cancelled, has to find alternative means to get the message out, and in due course they make enemies with some of the most powerful and dangerous people on earth. So they have to flee to a safe country where they sort of go into hiding to a certain extent. But I won't give too much away.
No, I was going to say, don't give too much away because otherwise people will go, oh well, we know the plot, and
Yeah.
that's
That's
that.
probably as you go. Yeah,
But yes, I mean, I would imagine anything with a title like Morewellian, and once you get in and you realise, you read the back of well, let me read what it says on the back just to sort of set the scene. A mystery virus from China is sweeping the globe. But when a whistleblower and a journalist, as you've just said, alert the world of its true origins, they come under fire from the global establishment. And of course, we've seen that umpteen times all over the place. What are they hiding? And why the collusion between governments, the media, big tech pharma, and the medical authorities? Discovering the answers to these and other questions, they must risk all to awaken the world to an agenda that threatens to change humanity forever. And so you send them off on this adventure. Did you have any, as a writer yourself, and whilst you were in China, did you have any sense that the world was all going to just? I mean, I know you said a little bit earlier, but that the Chinese people themselves would just be so like the rest of us, so following? I mean, they must know what wet markets are like and the likelihood of getting things, the diseases and all of that. Would other Chinese people as docile and subservient as we're led to believe
Well,
over here?
it's very interesting actually, because the Hong Kong people are Cantonese, so they're
Right,
all Chinese natives, if you like, sort of. They're from the same gene pool,
right.
and many of the Hong Kong people I met, while I was teaching, their parents themselves came from the mainland, and yet they had a very strong sense of identity of Hong Kong and its freedom, and they kind of looked down on China, the mainland, a little bit, because they thought it was kind of backward and oppressive, and they loved the freedom that existed in Hong Kong. Now, what I didn't realise while I was there was that they would be so strong and resolute once the handover took place and China took control of Hong Kong, and they started cracking down on their freedoms and started,
Yes.
you know, booksellers and people like that were suddenly disappearing because they were selling the wrong book, and the Chinese government was trying to extradite people from Hong Kong to China for kind of thought crimes, which was against the law that had been agreed under a treaty with Britain. And the Hong Kong people responded by taking to the streets in their absolute millions. It was
Yes, I remember
some of the
seeing the
biggest,
reports.
yeah, some of the biggest demonstrations ever seen in human history. And they kind of took over the university, they took over the legislative building. Um, they were really strongly pro freedom. And I sort of covered this quite a lot in the book because I was so impressed. And to be honest, while I was there, I didn't even realize that they had such a burning desire for that freedom. And I was just so impressed with what I've seen since I left, to be honest, that it kind of inspired me, and probably inspired me in some part to write the book. Because one thing that people didn't pick up on was that um, when the virus we'll say emerged, we'll use that word.
Yes.
Um, it the timing of it was incredibly convenient for the communist government in China, in that the Hong Kong riots and demonstrations were at their absolute peak. They were facing a Tiananmen Square kind of situation where the Chinese government was losing control. They were in danger of potentially losing Hong Kong altogether, and they were also concerned that it would spread to other Chinese cities.
Yes.
Suddenly, there's a virus afoot, and under the guise of public health emergency, they're able to sweep everyone off the streets. They're able to scare the population. They're able to enact emergency legislation, and just like that, within a few days, the Hong Kong uprising has been quelled. And meanwhile, you're getting the first cases arising in the rest of the world. So the rest of the world is preoccupied. They're not seeing what's going on in China, in Hong Kong. Job done.
Yeah.
But nobody talks about that. So that
No, I mean, it's a very interesting coincidence, isn't it?
yeah, yeah, it's a fantastic
And
coincidence. When you have a problem, a crisis, and a solution, and they all sort of emanate from the same place, and those that the place that created the crisis benefits from the solution. We know we know
it's just
we
very
know.
convenient,
Yeah,
isn't it? I mean,
it's it could be a coincidence. Of course, it could. But
I mean, I'm not.
it's convenient.
It's not. I mean, it's a convenient thing that it was lucky, I suppose, for a controlling power that such a virus should strike at that time, and people could make their own
Yeah,
inferments whether that was
but
how
that
that
kind of went under the radar in this part of the world. The
right.
people, because we were concerned about our own safety and our own
Yes, of course.
freedoms being eroded, we weren't really perhaps taking any notice of what was happening on the other side of the world. And that was maybe that was part of the plan, or maybe that was just another
So do you think?
coincidental.
Yeah. So do you think? I mean, we're in a situation at the moment in which the Labour government that is now in, instead of the Conservatives, seem to have sort of just taken up the mantle and gone more forward with many of the policies that the Conservatives want: more control, more surveillance, more power to them. And I think people are beginning to see that perhaps what was promised is not being delivered. Do you think if the public over here, just hypothetically, if there was an uprising in people, that a similar, I'm not suggesting exactly identical, but a similar sort of, would it be advantageous to the government if something should happen in which we all had to lock down again?
Well, I mean, I've sort of commented that um, like 1984 is like a warning to humanity,
Yes.
but our leaders seem to take it as an instruction manual. We're sort of afraid of it. They're inspired by it.
Yes.
So, I mean, Keir Starmer is just he's a nightmare, isn't he? It's just, I mean, even people who are sort of on the left sort of hate him as well.
Yes. Well, it
Um,
does seem to be very much. I mean, he made that comment, didn't he, when he was interviewed? Would he rather be in Westminster or Davos? I mean, he made that, and
exactly.
he confessed the answer there
I
that we
mean,
all know.
that should have precluded him from any chance of becoming prime minister. That should have been all over the media, all over the newspapers, everything. And people should well, so he's more interested in Davos, which represents the interests of the 0.1% of the billionaires and
Yes.
the corporations and the sort of ruling class.
Yes.
And he
No.
thinks that's more important than Parliament, which represents the people, and you get away with that. Thank God. And so he gave us a warning, and we just we ignored it and still voted in.
Well, I mean, look at the numbers who actually voted for him, which of course is minuscule compared to the rest of the country.
Yeah, it wasn't so much that people voted for him; it was that the Conservatives stayed at home.
Yeah.
And I couldn't vote for Conservative, not after the way they had ruled the country for the last however long. Conservative in name only. They were pathetic, really.
Yes.
But if you go back to Hong Kong and the contrast between the young people in Hong Kong and the young people in the West, it's so stark. I wish we could be like that, where there's this burning desire for freedom, and they care about the things that matter in life. Whereas a lot of our young people just care about the woke culture and you know the shallow,
Yes.
pointless things in life.
Well, it does. I mean, one of the things I suppose that summed up the situation over here in the West is with the talk about warmongering, and then the business about having people sign up to join the army, conscription, force. You could see in the First World War, yes, people were very patriotic and wanted to fight for king and country, and they sort of went off not really understanding quite what it was that they were going to be in trenches and going over the top shot at as cannon fodder. But who, you wonder in their right mind, is the way that the woke culture has gripped the nation? Who is really interested in fighting for king and country, and who's patriotic to this country anymore, particularly to a government that seems to be squeezing the actual life force out of everyone and eliminating traditions and customs that this country may once have deemed a good thing.
Yeah, and you've got the situation where people are afraid now to speak their mind on whatever Facebook or Twitter or to take to the streets. And I just think, like you were saying, young men or boys who were like 15 back in the 1930s or before the First World War were falsifying their age because they wanted to go and fight for their country and defend its freedoms. And we're afraid of maybe being put in the slammer for a couple of years. I think we need to stand up and be brave and resolute and stick two fingers up
Well, I mean,
the authority.
if the government was stating we are the masters and you are the slaves, then we all know where we are. But because the government pretends to be on our side, but doesn't act as if it's on our side, people are like, well, hang on a minute, we don't know quite where we are, and it becomes very confusing because people want the freedom, and it's the people who should be in charge and say, hang on, we're the ones that are in charge. You should be doing what we want. And it doesn't seem to matter how much you say this, and I say this on the show. It's like, hang on a minute, isn't the idea, even if democracy was a good thing, and that's questionable in and of itself, that if we're in charge, we should be instructing the MPs to tell them what we want in our constituencies, and the MPs then represent us. But they just seem to represent top-down policies that we seem to be shackled to.
Yeah, but the good thing is, I suppose, I mean, this has probably been going on, for as long as politics has existed. But I think
Yes.
more and more people are becoming aware now that they have an agenda that suits only the elites, and
Right.
everything they do seems to be towards promoting that end. And then you get into the ideas of the potentially conspiracy theories of depopulation and world governments. Well, I don't think that is a conspiracy theory. I think that is a stated aim that they would like a world government. They want World Health Authority organization to have absolute power over their ability to vaccinate us or whatever.
Well, I mean, we see that seems to be the policies they're being putting forward, and the nations are all signing up to it. So again, it's hardly a conspiracy when it's
No, exactly.
plain. Do you think?
Yeah.
Sorry, I was going to say, do you think that your book could be published widely in Hong Kong now?
Oh no, absolutely not. So I have spoken to. No, I've not spoken to my old publisher recently, but the last time I did speak to him a couple of years ago, he was saying that he had some books where they had written the word Hong Kong as one word. Now, apparently, I didn't know this, but apparently, if you write Hong Kong as one word instead of two, Hong Kong, it has colonial sort of connections.
Oh, does it?
And so therefore they insisted not just that it get changed for future books, but all the present books get pulped. And they were making his life an absolute misery. I mean, I don't know how he's getting on now because he's not. I've not heard from him recently, and he might even owe me a few quid for the last book. I don't know. But maybe that's right.
That's it. He's kept quiet now.
But to be fair, he's probably struggling because of what's going on.
Yes.
That you know, it would be absolutely impossible. He would probably get locked up if he did publish it.
And so that just goes to show, free speech, allowing people to read what they want, writers to write what they want, just so that people can, just a piece of entertainment or complete fiction is being curtailed, so that publishers are. I mean, many, even over here, I imagine you might struggle to have a publishing deal with this particular book.
Like I say, I didn't even bother to try. With my first book, I sent it out to various publishers all over England, and eventually it was one in Hong Kong that accepted it. But this one I didn't even bother. But if we go back to Hong Kong, there's a guy in the book. I don't know if you've got that far yet. Have you got to the character Johnny Lee?
Oh, the name rings a bell. Maybe I saw it flicking through.
So he's another one where I've changed the name, and he's loosely based on someone. I think I can say that. There's a man called Jimmy Lai. Jimmy Lai, who he arrived in Hong Kong when he was like, I don't know, 5 years old, and he built up from nothing a clothing emporium, and then he
yes, you do
and then he found, and so this happened in real life. Then he founded a newspaper which became the most popular newspaper in Hong Kong in the Chinese language, the Apple Daily. And the Apple Daily was like a very pro freedom organ, and it was like a thorn in the side of the the Communist Party, and he was very fearless and brave. But he's now in prison in China. So that's a measure of the kind of crackdowns that have taken place, where they should have been protected.
Yeah.
I think under the treaty with Britain, I think they should have been protected for 50 years or something. I'm not quite sure, but they've completely, ridden roughshod over that. And this very good, decent, honourable man is, having a miserable time in the Chinese prison at this moment. So
Yeah.
I've included him in the book, and also as respect to him, and to the sort of freedom movement out there. Yeah.
Yeah. And would you go back to Hong Kong now?
Yeah, I wouldn't mind going back. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting place to visit.
Mm.
I've kind of lost contact with a lot of my friends out there, which is a bit unfortunate, because maybe the social media wasn't so well advanced when I was out there, and I've not really kept in touch with too many people, which might have been good in terms of book sales and that.
Yes.
But it's, yeah, no, it's still an interesting place to go. Hopefully I wouldn't get picked up just yet, but who knows?
So okay, so this is the book that you've done. How long did it take to write?
I think it took like a couple of years, but then even after I wrote it, I'm a little bit of a perfectionist, so I went over it several times, and so maybe 2.5 years if you include
Yeah,
the
because the
and
editing process
I
is
cut out like 30,000 words where I felt like I was maybe being a bit too political in certain places, or I was repeating myself, because if you're writing something over 2 years,
yes.
sometimes forget what you've written before, and
Well, that's it.
repeat
Yeah,
yourself, and it's a bit annoying, but you know,
yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, and
sometimes less is more, as the cliche goes. Um,
leave them wanting more, of course,
yeah,
as they say.
yeah,
So, have you got anything in the pipeline that you're working on now, or are you just on the I'm promoting this book, I want to get this out?
yeah. I'd rather carry on with that for the time being. I mean,
Mm.
people have asked me that, and I've kind of thought, they're probably Bill Gates and the like. They're talking about another pandemic, aren't they? And when they talk about that, they're normally right, because they were predicting this one before.
Yeah, clever people, aren't
Yeah,
they?
and I have a certain fear about that it could be more serious, and it could be like a revenge on those that weren't vaccinated, if you know what I mean.
Right.
But yeah, that's.
So,
But I haven't
so in
started.
other words, if something like that happens, it might help the book sales. Is that what you're saying?
No, no, no. It's just that might be an idea for another,
Right.
like a sequel.
Yes.
Yeah, no, no, no. I sincerely hope it doesn't happen.
No, of course. I was being facetious,
Yeah,
and trying to keep it light at the same time.
yeah.
So, I see. So, yeah. So you're in the promotion of this, um, selling. I mean, I dabbled with writing some children books some years ago, and then I realised that what I was actually writing was not really children's books. Although it was a children's plot, I kept writing in sort of more adult terms, and I found I couldn't quite sort of dumb it down for what's on the shelves at the moment,
Yeah, I can imagine that'd be a challenge.
which is awkward because I was brought up on books from the 50s and 60s and perhaps before, and I just found when I was doing the research to what was deemed 8 to 10-year-olds material, I thought, blimey, this is pretty puerile, isn't it? Because children are not reading, and so they don't seem to have the same levels of ability to read
Right. Yeah, yeah.
complex sentences or have new words given to them to increase their vocabulary. So I found that very tricky, but I enjoyed the process. The bit that I didn't so much enjoy was the editing. I could get the stories down, but it was then the sentence construction. And I realized how terrible my own writing was, and you had to sort of learn again. Did you find writing a challenge, a book?
It's definitely a challenge, and but I do find the more you do it, the more you improve. So I think Morewellian, I think it's more well crafted and more well written than my previous book. So I think I
Mm.
did
It
gain
reads
quite.
very well. It
Oh,
does
thank
read
you.
very well,
Yeah, thank you.
and you know sometimes when you're misreading and you're going, I don't really know what he meant there, but yes, it is very well crafted, definitely.
Oh, thank you.
Which is always a relief when somebody sends you a book and you said, "Oh, come on the show,"
Yeah,
and then the
yeah.
last thing you want to go is, "Oh, this is a pile of rubbish."
I was quite surprised you were so preemptive with that one. But I
Well,
certainly appreciate that. Um,
yeah, I mean, it's a book of our time, which is definitely thing. So it's that, and I know that lots of people are writing these sort of things because I guess there's an audience who are interested to sort of see if there's something else that they hadn't seen somewhere else. But when it's written very well, but also as I say, I like the fact that it took me to places that I hadn't been. And at first, I was quite nervous about that because, I'm a bit of a person who doesn't like to be too much out of the comfort zone. And if you're talking
okay.
about sort of England in 1940s, I'm very familiar with that because I read lots of books from that era, and it's like, oh yes, this is all very chummy, isn't it? It's all very nice, and I can get through that. But it is interesting if an author can take you to somewhere that you're not familiar with, or the politics or the lifestyle that people have, and they can actually paint that picture. I think that's very rewarding from the reader's point of view.
Yeah, and I
Right?
think I think I tried to evoke certain values from the period in Thailand and
Yes,
also
there
in
was
Hong
certainly a
Kong.
lot of massage parlours
Well, not so much.
visited.
I wasn't referring to that, but I was kind of referring to like the kind of level of patriotism that they had,
Yes,
but decency and
and that was
national
interesting
unity, and
because you
also
did have a character there who was going to go off with him into the mountains, and then at the last minute she doesn't turn up, and she gets a friend to explain why.
yeah,
And
because she's very traditional and she's very sort of chaste and she cared about what the community thought and
yeah,
um, yeah, and also in Hong Kong with I think the young people there, they probably have more in common with the young people of this country in the 50s or something, where they still care about the sort of national unity and pride and
and family.
sort of maintaining traditional values and freedom and democracy rather than modern tawdry nonsense.
Yeah, and that's reassuring, I think, because we know how people just sort of throw those traits away very easily, and it's like, oh yeah, whatever can happen.
Yeah, it's
And
like, for example, if you're a patriotic Englishman, you will be sort of decried as a racist or a bigot or far right.
yeah,
Hello, Keir Starmer. But if you're in Thailand or somewhere, that's just a given. And in fact, it's a given in most countries, and we respect that about these other countries. That's why they have a distinct, unique, interesting culture. But in our own country, we just want to sort of throw it down the toilet or dilute it and not kind of respect our ancestors in a way that people in other countries do and take it for granted.
yes, and that's very interesting, and I think that's again another reason why when you read about other cultures and you then compare it to where you are and you think, oh yeah, because very often it's like being in the goldfish bowl, isn't it? You don't know what's you can't get an outside perspective because you're so busy in your goldfish bowl or
Mm.
in your echo chamber, and it's only when you see a different echo chamber or a different goldfish bowl you go, oh yeah, we've lost so much. Our standards
Yeah,
have slipped.
yeah, totally. Yeah,
Our
and that
respect for
was
family and our elders,
yeah,
and
yeah,
particularly old people who've got wisdom.
yeah. And look at how we're treating them now with the taking away the heating allowance and
Yeah,
while at the same time giving doctors a 25% pay rise and train drivers, God knows what. Um, yeah,
yes,
it's disgusting, really. It's just
and it does take a jolt really to see it in a different culture. And if you can't go there and see it, then reading about it in a book and going, yeah, hang on a minute, that A, that makes sense, and B, didn't we have that at one time?
Exactly. That's what I've tried to get across, and it wasn't. But that really was how it was. That's not
Yeah,
me going with an agenda and trying to find reasons to justify sort of patriotism or nationalism or whatever. That really was what I found while I was there. So I just
yes,
tried to kind of reflect that.
yes.
Or,
Well, I
or
mean, I suppose if you'd made it all up, then there's plenty of Chinese or Hong Kong people over here who would be going, well, this is rubbish because that's not how our country used to be or is or whatever. So obviously,
mm,
you're reflecting the truth of the situation, even though it's a work of fiction. The norms, the framework has to be there, doesn't it?
yeah, yeah. And to be honest, though, while I was in Hong Kong, I would never have thought though that the people did have that kind of level of resolve and um, determination to stand up for the values that really mattered. But when I
Mm.
was there, I kind of thought they were a little bit frivolous and a little bit. Um, I don't know. It just didn't come across to me that they were as strong as they proved themselves to be. Like in I suppose in a time of crisis, that's when people show their true mettle.
So, do you
Um,
think that we've gone through some sort of um, manufactured crisis? Do you think we did a good job for ourselves over here? I mean, can we look back proudly at how each of us and our fellow
mm.
citizen behaved? I mean,
No, no. I mean, I'd like to say yes, but
yeah, I'd love to say yes, but I can't
yeah. I
say
mean, I
that we
don't know if
did.
we did any worse than the average country, but no, I don't think we sort of really um, showed anything to be that proud of.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people seem to be at the time very proud that they were lining up at certain syringe centres,
Oh
and
yeah, and like proud to be vaccinated, on your Facebook. What? Are
exactly, yeah.
you serious?
Uh,
That's just bizarre.
but yeah, so that's it. So no, so nothing else in the pipeline in terms of books at the moment. It-
Um, Nothing directly. I'm now sort of working as a gardener.
right.
I,
Oh,
I, I
okay.
did I did think I could. My next book could be what the gardener saw. Um,
Ah, do you see? And I
yeah, but the
imagine that
trouble,
you
but the
do see
trouble
it.
is, I think I'd have to do that for a lifetime before I had enough material
Right.
for that.
Yeah,
Um,
that would be very interesting there. Because, I mean, particularly during 2020, when everybody spent so much time, if you had a garden, you could go nowhere else. I mean, when I went walking, I saw so many gardens that seemed to, one week they'd done this, the next week, because out of boredom, they changed the garden to a different thing.
oh
Everyone was
yeah,
doing
yeah.
up their houses, weren't
Yeah,
they?
everyone was putting up pergolas and sort of summer houses and
The garden centres never had
new
so much
patios.
business,
Yeah, 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 exactly.
as key workers that they were, as they all
Yeah,
were.
yeah,
It was
yeah.
a very bizarre time. Do you what do you read?
Well, yeah. I mean, like you, I've a fairly sort of busy life, and I don't read as much as I probably should. But I've
If
been sort of revisiting some books that I've read before, like recently. Have you ever read Laurie Lee?
yes, suddenly one morning, that one. That's
Yeah,
I love that one, and
I walked out one Midsummer Morning.
that's the one. That's it.
Yeah,
Yes,
it's brilliant,
I,
isn't it?
I do you know that I had when I was reading that I was writing phrases from there because
Mm.
it's so sumptuously written,
Oh God, yeah.
and
Because
and
he
he
was a poet, he
yes.
writes everything so lyrically and perfectly. He takes so much care over each word and sentence and phrase.
Yeah, I recommend that one to
Oh, it's
to,
just
to
yeah,
many people, and
beautifully
his whole
written.
journey to through Spain and all of that is just absolutely amazing.
Yeah, and he starts the book in England, so he walks from Gloucestershire
That's right.
to London, and then he works as a labourer in London. So it's quite interesting that section of England in the 19 maybe 50, early 50s or maybe
Yeah,
40s. Was it
I
late
think
40s? I think.
Yeah, it's after the war, isn't it? It's
Yeah, it's the late
post-war.
40s. And then he heads over to Spain and sort of gets involved in the Spanish Civil War, or just at the start of the Spanish Civil War. So he's setting the scene of what's, Spain is like a very peasant, rural, poor country at the time. And
But it had the again, it had so much appeal to me. The sort of family structure, even though people had nothing, they were welcoming in this Englishman who was walking in the midday sun.
yeah.
All of that into their poor little yards where the dog barely had anything to eat, and they're sleeping on rags in courtyards and things like this.
Yeah.
I mean, it's absolutely. I mean, and of course his writing is just, as I said, so sumptuous and beautiful, and also pared down.
It's not a long book or anything, but it's
No,
it's
but you
absolutely
take
brilliant.
time to read it. I was reading it out loud because I just didn't want to skip things. So yeah,
It's beautiful. I mean, his most famous book is Cider with Rosie, but
yes,
I walked out one midsummer morning is probably
it's
I
about,
prefer that one anyway. But
I read about half of Cider with Rosie, and I sort of couldn't, because I'd read the other one first.
yeah, me too.
Cider with Rosie just seemed, it took forever to get going, and I know it was much younger. He was much younger in that, and of course it's all on a farm and what have you. But which I love, and I'm reading loads of farming books. But the I walked out one morning is, I don't know. It's just it's that sense that he just left, and he just sort of goes on this journey.
Yeah, it's like such an adventurous thing to do, and he just didn't care. He didn't hardly have any money, and then he was busking his way through,
Oh, that's
playing
yes,
for a
because
few
yeah,
pesetas
with
here and there.
his fiddle or violin, I can't remember which one it was,
Yeah. I
and
mean,
people are coming up to him and getting him to play certain tunes, and he's picking up, especially when he's in Spain, he's picking up certain tunes, and the buskers come with him, and he joins them for a bit, and then they move off somewhere else, and it
yeah,
is
and
a
then he has a
lovely,
little bit of romance here and there, and
yeah, and he just sort of moves on, and it is. So we're selling the wrong book here.
well, yeah, but if you like that, you might like Morewellian. Hopefully,
Absolutely.
a little bit of it rubbed off onto Morewellian, because I like to capture the sort of feeling of the place in the same way that
Yes.
Lee did, and I like to evoke the characters, and and maybe I've got more of a plot line and a storyline than his one. If I can say, if I could,
Yes.
a little bit of one-upmanship. I'm not saying I'm as good a writer as him, of course, but yeah,
No, I mean there was. I guess because of the nature of your book, you're constrained by a certain plot of resolving, whereas his is much more like almost a stream of consciousness. It's a journey that
yes,
goes on,
yeah,
and you're eager to know. Well, where's
that,
this heading?
yeah. That might be more like my previous book, which is
Right. Oh, interesting.
because his book is sort of autobiographical, and my other one would be classed as more semi autobiographical anyway. Uh,
Right.
Whereas this one has a bit more of a plot, and it kind of has an ending that I was working towards all the time, which was kind of tricky, because I
Yes.
never quite knew I knew how I wanted to end it, but I never quite knew how I was going to get there. But as you write, you gain inspiration, and
Are you are you are you a plotter by chapter, or is there a certain element of, I don't know what's going to happen, but I know ultimately I'm steering this,
yep.
all these characters and this soup of a story in this general direction?
Yeah, definitely the latter.
Right.
And I don't even worry about the chapters too much until I finished, and then I think, right, how does I just separate it really after I finished a bit generally.
Right. Oh, interesting.
Um, yeah, and sometimes even if it's too long a chapter, you sort of cut and paste a bit, or just delete a bit, or
Yeah.
um,
I find the whole writing process fascinating, and listening to writers, how they, because everyone has a different approach. And when I was doing my children's stuff, these characters just lived in my head, and they kept, wherever you suddenly go, let's write that down. Things would just occur to me, and then when I sat down to write all of what was occurring to me in the day, it was like, no, I'm not interested in that, because this is it was like a film or an audio or an audio book dictating it to me
Yeah, I
because you
mean,
get
I get inspired when I'm writing. Really, it's harder for me to. I mean, occasionally I'd wake up in the middle of the night or in the morning. I think, oh, there's an idea. I have to
get
get it
up.
down. But I'd say 80% of the ideas come when I'm actually writing.
Right.
It's sort of the process just inspires me and gets my imagination going.
Yeah.
And sometimes I don't know what I'm going to write, but I just start writing, and then one thing leads to another, and
And
before you know it, it's 2 o'clock in the morning, and you've just written 1,000 words.
yeah, brilliant. I guess you would encourage other people to write.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, yeah. Just.
If I mean, not necessary to write a book or for sales or anything, but just to write for because the pleasure of being creative is enormous.
Yeah, and the sort of intellectual knowledge you'll gain, the sort of journey you'll go on. It's yeah, it's very fulfilling,
Mm.
and you'll probably find out things about yourself as well, and
I,
you'll improve your vocabulary. You'll think about things in a different way, in a deeper way. Don't be constrained by thinking, oh, I don't know, I haven't got a whole plot line. I haven't got an ending. Even if you haven't got an ending, you can that can come as you're writing.
yes.
Have a go, get it down, and then even if it's rubbish, you can delete certain bits, you can edit certain bits, you can cut and paste certain bits, and you
And often it's just even as you say, you might because I think people can't rate what they've written anyway because they've written it, and it's like, well, this is just
oh
rubbish.
yeah
I've just
yeah
written.
yeah, yeah.
Is to put it in a drawer and forget about it for 6 months, and then look at it afresh and go, oh, actually, that's not as bad as I thought it was. And in fact, that bit's really good. I couldn't write that. Oh, wait a minute, I did. Did you find that? Did you
Oh yeah,
find that
well,
you
my first book, I started writing it while I was still in Hong Kong, which was like in 2003.
right?
But I was never really quite happy with it. I didn't think it was good enough. And then I came back to England, and then I ended up having twins. So then
Oh,
that
wow!
that took out a
Congratulations.
fair bit of my
Yes.
my lifetime. And then as they grew up a bit, then I revisited it and thought, actually, it's not too bad, but it needs improvement.
Mm.
And maybe with my extra wisdom and knowledge of years, I was able to hone it and improve it, and manage to find a publisher for it.
Well, that's
Um,
that's an achievement in and of itself these days. So well done you.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah. Well, anyway, this is the book Morewellian. Um, you're Stephen Griffith. This is where is this available in all good bookshops? Where
No, no, it's just on Amazon
right?
at the
Okay,
moment, anyway. But who knows in the future?
exactly. I'll put a link in the description so people can go and have a look and hopefully buy it. Um, and it would be interesting to see what have you got friends and family that have read it? Do they support what you do, or they just think you're a bit of a loony?
Yeah, yeah. No, most of them are quite supportive.
Excellent.
Maybe some of the maybe more left-leaning family members I've not haven't
Well,
read.
I mean, I wonder when you write something like this, there's plenty of people who go, who think conspiracy people are tin foil hat wearers and what have you. But I just wonder if it can change people's mind, their
Yeah, yeah,
perspective.
and also I've just mentioned like left-leaning people, but that's I think the old paradigms of right and left are shifting.
Absolutely.
That there are people from the left, for example, like Naomi Wolf and Russell Brand, people like that who sort of come from the left, and we've sort of found that we have quite a bit in common. And after all, if you're sort of anti-establishment and anti-elite and for the people and for freedom, since when, why does that have to be a right-wing perspective? That should be just a decent human
Yeah.
instinct, really. So I think anyone that's sort of cares about freedom and humanity would hopefully get something out of the book,
Absolutely.
regardless
Yeah.
of whether they're on the right or left.
Yeah, no, I mean, as you say, I think those things have collided now because on the one hand, you've got people do want to conserve some things, which what conservatives used to stand for, and then
Yeah,
other
yeah.
people, they want to be progressive in other areas, and you can see that there are extremes in both, and none of that's very
Yeah,
helpful.
but if you just think of like the anti-war sort of coalition, that used to be like a left-wing position. Now the Democrat Party in America, they're pro every war. They want to make money out of war. It's almost become it's just an upside down world, isn't it? Everything's
Yeah,
turned on its
which
head.
we're almost
And
having to try and work it all out so we can start again. Heaven forbid that there'll be a great reset or anything, but anyway.
mm, yeah, well, we need a great revolution, maybe, or a great renaissance, should we say?
Absolutely.
Mm.
Well, listen, Stephen. This we've done. I've enjoyed this conversation because we're talking about books, and I love books. So thank you for that. And also your book, which I am a third of the way through, and I'm enjoying the plot now because it's really starting to sort of resonate with things that I know and remember from not too long ago. So I'm fascinated to see how it comes to the ending that you've. You said that you were trying to get to. So thank you for that. If anybody's interested, I'll leave the link in the description. Morewellian, there we are. You've heard a discussion. I hope you enjoy it. Thank you for being my guest today. It's
I
been
really appreciate that, Richard.
thoroughly interesting. Yes, looking forward to what the gardener saw in 10 years' time or
Well, maybe,
whatever.
yeah, 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 great
The
stuff.
secrets behind lawnmowers and all of that. All good fun.
Yeah.
Stephen, thank you so much. It's been most enjoyable.
Yeah, thank you very much, Richard. Really appreciate it.
Oh, that's a
You,
pleasure.
you take care.
So there we are, ladies and gentlemen. I'll be back with more monologues and more wonderful guests. And in the meantime, I should get my head down and do some reading. Thank you for joining us. Take care. Look after yourselves from Stephen and myself. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.